She worked 3 double shifts in 4 days. She ate 1 meal a day if she was lucky. She owed $47,000 in hospital bills from a miscarriage. And the father of that baby? He laughed when she told him she was pregnant, said handle it, and never looked back. 6 months later, that same man walked into her emergency room with a new woman on his arm and a diamond ring that could blind you, just to invite her to his engagement party. Just to make sure she knew she was still alone, still invisible, still nothing. But that night, something inside her finally snapped. At 3 in the morning, shaking with humiliation, she dialed a number she had been afraid to call, a number belonging to a man whose bodyguards carried guns and whose name made doctors take a step backward. He picked up on the second ring and said 5 words that changed her life. "And what time shall I come for you?" The next evening, she walked into the most exclusive restaurant in the city wearing a dress that cost more than her rent, and watched her ex-boyfriend's face turn white in front of 20 guests. But that was just the beginning. Because the man standing beside her? He had secrets dark enough to bury them both. And a stranger was already calling to warn her. The people who get close to him end up dead. Or worse. This is Emma Chen's story. And it will make you rethink everything you believe about what it means to truly be alive. This story is a powerful reminder that your value was never defined by the people who left you behind. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop being safe and start being seen. If you have ever felt invisible, abandoned, or forgotten, Emma's journey will speak to your soul. Above me, the fluorescent lights in the hospital cafeteria hummed a terrible buzzing sound, like giant insects trapped behind plastic. They bathed everything in a jaundiced yellow light, turning my cup of coffee into something that looked like murky rust water. Still, I wrapped my cold hands around the flimsy paper cup, desperately trying to steal some of its warmth. 3 double shifts in just 4 days had hollowed me out completely, leaving an empty shell that just went through the motions. The cheap vinyl of the chair protested with a loud squeak when I shifted my weight. My blue scrubs were faded and worn thin, especially at the knees, clinging to my exhausted frame. The cafeteria was alive with the strange, quiet energy that fills a hospital at 2 in the morning. I could hear the low murmur of residents talking, the distant clatter of a dropped tray, and the sharp, shrill beep of a pager that always made my shoulders tighten with tension. I knew I should be sleeping. I should have been back in my tiny studio apartment, the one with the faucet that dripped endlessly, and a neighbor who seemed to think 3 in the morning was the perfect time for bass practice. But being home meant being alone with my thoughts, and my thoughts were a dangerous place. They always led back to things I had spent the last 6 months fighting to forget. They led back to Marcus and to the sound of his laughter when I told him I was pregnant. That laugh had been sharper and more painful than any of the cruel words that came after it. Emma Chen. A voice cut through my dark thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I looked up and saw Dr. Morrison, one of the attending physicians from the emergency room, staring down at me, a clipboard in his hand. "We need you down in trauma too," he said. "We have a motor vehicle accident on its way, about 5 minutes out." I just nodded, already pushing myself to my feet, my body moving on pure instinct. The barely touched coffee found its way into the trash can, another $3 I could not afford to waste, gone. But that was my life now, wasn't it? Just a long series of small wastes, minor losses, and empty moments that all added up to a life I hardly even recognized as my own anymore. When I pushed my way through the double doors, the emergency room was a scene of controlled chaos. Nurses moved with an ingrained, practiced speed, their hands deftly preparing beds and checking vital equipment. The large bay doors of the ambulance entrance were wide open, letting in a rush of cold November night air that smelled of wet asphalt and rain. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and began checking the contents of the trauma cart. My hands knew these actions so well, I could probably do them with my eyes closed. In a way, I felt like I was already blind, just sleepwalking through a life where I was invisible to everyone, especially to myself. The sound of the sirens grew louder, closer. Flashing red and blue lights danced across the walls, painting the room in frantic colors. A paramedic called out as they rushed the gurney inside. Single vehicle collision. The patient is a male in his late 20s, GCS of 15, his vitals are stable. He was refusing transport at first. I am fine. The voice that sliced through the organized bedlam was like dark velvet stretched over pure steel. It was the kind of voice that commanded attention, making people stop and listen without knowing why. This is all completely unnecessary. I finally looked up from the supply cart, and for a second, the entire world seemed to tilt. He was sitting on the gurney as if it were a throne, his posture perfectly rigid, even with a trail of blood running down his face from a deep gash near his temple. He was wearing a suit, and I knew enough to see it was the kind of suit that cost more than I could make in half a year. It was torn at the shoulder, revealing a white shirt underneath that was stained with crimson. But it was his face that truly held me captive. He had sharp, defined cheekbones and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. His dark eyes swept across the room with a calculating assessment that felt almost military in its precision. He could not have been much older than 30. Yet there was something ancient and knowing in his gaze, the look of a man who had seen far too much and had forgotten absolutely nothing. Standing just behind him, positioned by the door like silent guards, were two large men in dark suits that seemed to bulge unnaturally at the hip. They were not hospital security, they were not police officers. They were something else entirely. "Sir, you really need to let us examine you," Dr. Morrison said, his voice strained and tight. I recognized that specific tone. It was the one he always used when he was deeply nervous, but trying his best to hide it from everyone. The man's intense gaze shifted to the doctor, and I watched as Dr. Morrison physically took a small step backward. "I have had worse cuts from shaving," he said dismissively. "Just clean it up so I can get out of here. Hospital policy requires a full—" "I do not care about your policies." Each word he spoke was incredibly precise, perfectly controlled, yet underneath them ran a dangerous current. "Clean the wound. Now." Dr. Morrison's panicked eyes darted across the room and found mine. "Nurse Chen, could you please handle this?" he asked, his voice almost a plea. "I need to go check on the patient in Bay 3. Coward, was the first thought that flashed through my mind, but I could not really blame him. Every single one of my instincts was screaming at me to say no, to make up any excuse to get away. This man radiated danger like a furnace radiates heat. It poured off him in invisible, undeniable waves. But I was just so tired. I was so bone-deep weary that fear felt like just one more emotion I did not have the energy left to feel. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. I gathered the necessary supplies, antiseptic, gauze, butterfly closures, and made my way toward the gurney. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming. He smelled of expensive cologne, rich leather, and something else, something sharp and metallic that might have been blood or maybe even gunpowder. The combination of scents made my head feel light. "This might sting a little," I said, my voice sounding much steadier than I actually felt. I had stitched up gang members, treated overdose patients, and cared for people who had tried to end their lives or the lives of others. I could certainly handle one man with a head wound, no matter how profoundly unsettling he was. I reached up with a sterile wipe to clean the blood from his temple, and his hand shot out like a snake, grabbing my wrist. His grip was not hard enough to be painful, but it was firm enough to stop me cold. His skin was warm against mine, and I felt my own pulse hammering under his fingertips. "Your hands are shaking." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "I am fine," I insisted, trying to pull my arm away, but his grip remained firm. "I need to clean that wound before it gets infected." His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt completely pinned by his gaze, like a butterfly under glass. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, they looked darker than I had first thought. DS7, almost pure black. And I saw something in their depths that made my breath catch in my throat. It was not cruelty, not exactly. It was more like the absolute, unwavering certainty of a man who had never been told no in his entire life and would have no idea how to react if he were. "When was the last time you slept?" he asked, his voice low. The question was so completely unexpected that I let out a short, bitter laugh. "What are you, my doctor now?" "Answer the question. I do not have to answer anything to you. You are the patient here, not my interrogator." I tugged harder at my wrist, and this time, to my surprise, he released me. My skin tingled where his fingers had been. "Now please sit still and let me do my job." For a tense moment, I thought he was going to refuse. Then, I saw something shift in his expression. It was not quite a smile, but it was very close. "You are not afraid of me." "Should I be?" I asked, finally starting to clean the wound. My hands were perfectly steady now, in spite of everything. The cut was not as deep as it looked. It would not need stitches, just some butterfly closures and a— His eyes were so dark they seemed almost black under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room, and there was a look in them that made my breath hitch in my throat. It was not simple cruelty. It was something deeper, the absolute self-assurance of a man who had never once been denied anything and would not know how to handle it. "When was the last time you actually slept?" he asked. The question was so out of place that a short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "What are you now, my personal physician?" "Just answer my question. I do not have to answer anything you ask. You are the patient here, not the one asking the questions." I yanked harder on my wrist, and to my surprise, this time he released me. A strange tingle remained on my skin where his fingers had been. "Now, please sit still and allow me to do my job." For a tense second, I was certain he would refuse. Then, a subtle change moved across his features. It was not quite a smile, but it was dangerously close. "You are not frightened of me." "Should I be frightened of you?" I began to clean the wound, my hands surprisingly steady, all things considered. The injury was not very deep. It would not require stitches, just some butterfly bandages and a very firm lecture about monitoring himself for concussion symptoms, a warning I was sure he would completely disregard. He never answered my question. He just watched me work, his gaze so intense it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I could also feel his bodyguards observing us, their silent presence like a constant, heavy pressure at my back. "You are very skilled at this," he finally said, after a long moment of silence. "It is my profession. That is not what I was referring to." I chose not to ask him what he meant. I did not want to understand his meaning, nor did I want to examine why his deep voice was causing a strange flutter in my stomach. I focused entirely on the injury, on the familiar, practiced motions of cleaning and bandaging, on anything at all except the way he was looking at me, as if I were a complex puzzle he was determined to figure out. "All finished," I announced, taking a deliberate step back as I peeled off my disposable gloves. "You really ought to stay for a few hours of observation, but I have a strong feeling you are not going to do that." "You guessed correctly," he said as he rose to his feet. It was only then that I realized how tall he was, at least 6 feet 2 inches, with a powerful frame that suggested countless hours in a gym and perhaps a life involving routine violence. "What is your name? It is printed on my identification badge. I want to hear you say it for me." There was a command in his tone that made refusal feel like an impossible option, even as every logical instinct in my mind was screaming at me to turn around and walk away. "Emma. Emma Chen." He repeated my name with a slow deliberation, as if he were savoring the taste of each syllable on his tongue. "Emma Chen." Then he retrieved his phone. Actually, I saw he had more than one, at least two that were visible, and he made a call without ever breaking his intense eye contact with me. "Bring the car around to the front. We are leaving now." "Sir, you really should remain for observation. Thank you for your professional assistance, Emma Chen." He began walking toward the exit, his guards immediately falling into a protective formation around him, like satellites around a planet. He stopped just before the door and turned back to face me. "You work far too much. You should go home now. Get some sleep. I do not need lifestyle advice from one of my patients. That ghost of a smile appeared again. No, I do not imagine you do. He then reached inside his jacket, and his guards instantly became more alert. I noticed that even they did not seem entirely sure what he was about to pull out. He withdrew a simple business card. He held it out for me to take. If you ever find yourself needing anything, I will not, I said, but I took the card from his hand anyway. Refusing the offer felt like it would be dangerous, in a way I could not quite explain. The card was made of a heavy, expensive stock. It had nothing on it but a name written in elegant script, Damien Cross, and a single phone number printed below it. You might be surprised, he said, his voice low. And then he was gone, swept out of the emergency room and into the night by his entourage of shadows. I just stood there, clutching the card, my heart beating far too fast, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. Around me, the emergency room had already returned to its normal state of controlled chaos. But something felt different now, as if he had left a permanent mark on the space itself. Emma, one of the other nurses, Sarah, suddenly appeared at my elbow. Are you okay? You look like you just saw a ghost. I am fine, I said, quickly shoving the card deep into my scrub pocket. Just tired. That guy was so intense. Did you see the size of those bodyguards? I am pretty sure they were carrying weapons. I did not notice, I lied. I had noticed everything, of what he was going to do next. The rest of my long shift passed in a predictable haze. I treated a young boy with a fractured arm, an elderly woman experiencing chest pains, and an intoxicated college student who had fallen from a roof while trying to show off for his friends. These were normal, safe situations, the kind of problems that did not cause my heart to race or my hands to tremble. But when I finally punched out at 6 in the morning, when I stepped out into the cold gray light of the November dawn, I found myself pulling out his business card. I just stood there, staring at the embossed name, wondering who exactly Damien Cross was and why he had looked at me as if I were the most captivating thing he had seen in many years. My phone vibrated with a new message. It was a text from Marcus. Lunch this week. We really need to talk. We should talk. As if he had not made his stance perfectly clear 6 months prior when he told me to just take care of it, before walking out of my life for good without a single backward glance. I deleted his message without a reply and began the long, weary walk to the bus stop. My feet were throbbing, my back was screaming, my entire body ached with exhaustion. The morning air was so frigid it felt like it was burning my lungs, and far off in the city, the mournful sound of sirens echoed. I decided to throw the business card into the first public trash can I saw, or at least that was my intention. My hand froze in midair, hovering just above the opening of the bin, my fingers refusing to release their grip on the small piece of cardstock. With a sharp sound of frustration, I angrily shoved it deep into my coat pocket and continued on my way. 3 days after that, I was back in the emergency room for another grueling overnight shift when my entire life unraveled in a way I could have never possibly predicted. The evening began like any other. I checked in with the charge nurse, went over the patient charts, and helped prepare the floor for what was already looking like a chaotic Friday night. Dr. Morrison was on his scheduled day off, replaced by Dr. Patterson, who, thankfully, did not treat me like I was made of fragile glass every time he spoke to me. Around 7 in the evening, Sarah found me in a supply closet restocking bandages. Hey, someone is at the front desk asking for you. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Who is it? He did not give a name. He just said it was personal and very urgent. She wiggled her eyebrows playfully. And he is incredibly handsome, like ridiculously good-looking. Is there something that you are not sharing with me? But I was already gone, pushing right past her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs because I knew, with a chilling certainty, I just knew who was waiting for me out there. Except I was completely wrong. It was Marcus, standing in the middle of the waiting room, looking precisely the same as he had 6 months ago when he abandoned me. He had the same perfect hair, wore the same expensive suit, and flashed the same perfect smile that had once made me believe in childish fairy tales, but now only filled me with a feeling of deep nausea. And standing right next to him was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was tall and blonde, and she wore a diamond on her left ring finger that was so large it caught the overhead light like a miniature star. Emma. The sound of Marcus's voice was so warm and friendly, as if we were just two old friends meeting by chance. I have been trying to get in touch with you. I have been very busy. I folded my arms across my chest, suddenly and painfully aware of my wrinkled scrubs, my hastily tied messy bun, and the dark circles of exhaustion under my eyes. Next to his fiancée, because that is what that enormous ring had to mean, I looked like a stray that someone had dragged in off the street. "This is Amber," he said, casually draping his arm around her waist as if she were a prize. "Amber, this is Emma. We used to work together." Work together. That was the phrase he chose to use. Not we dated for 2 years, not I got her pregnant, just that we worked together. "It is so nice to finally meet you," Amber said, her smile flawless and utterly vacant of any genuine emotion. "Likewise." I forced the word out and turned my gaze back to Marcus. "What is it that you want?" "Just like I said in my text message, we really need to talk. I am having a small celebration dinner tomorrow night. It is an engagement party, actually, at the Sterling. I think you should come." The Sterling, of course he would choose that place. It was the most exclusive and expensive restaurant in the entire city. It was the kind of establishment where getting a reservation required at least 6 months advance notice and a credit card with no spending limit. "I am working tomorrow night. Just take the night off. It will be a lot of fun. You can meet all of our friends. You can celebrate with us." His smile grew even wider, becoming sharper and more cruel. "Unless, of course, you are afraid to come by yourself. I know you do not really have anyone these days." And there it was. The knife he had just slid between my ribs was so sharp and precise that I almost did not register the pain. Except I did feel it. I felt every single ounce of it. The humiliation was like acid, burning its way through my veins. "You came alone." Those 3 words were going to follow me for a long time. I could already hear them. Tomorrow evening, when I inevitably did not show up, he would say them to somebody. He would say them to everybody. "She came alone." Poor, pathetic Emma. She is still all alone, cannot even find a date. "I will think about it," was all I could manage to say. Great. He was already turning his back on me, already dismissing me from his thoughts. 8 o'clock in the evening. Try not to be late. I stood there and watched them leave, watched Marcus lean down to whisper something into Amber's ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. I watched them vanish out into the darkness, as if they had never been there at all. My hands were shaking again, so badly this time. I clenched them into tight fists, my fingernails digging painfully into my palms. Sarah had materialized at my side. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." "That was your ex-boyfriend, was it not? The one who, I said I am fine. But I was not fine. I was the absolute opposite of fine. I was the kind of not fine that compels people to do incredibly foolish, reckless, and potentially life-altering things. The kind of not fine that makes you pull a business card out of your locker at 3 in the morning during a break you had not earned and definitely should not have been taking. The kind of not fine that makes you stare at a phone number for 20 solid minutes. The kind of not fine that makes you dial that number before you can convince yourself not to. The phone rang only once, then twice, and then a voice answered. Yes. It was that voice, deep and controlled, and somehow both instantly recognizable and utterly alien. "Mr. Cross." My own voice sounded much smaller and weaker than I had intended. "This is Emma Chen, from the hospital. We met a few nights ago." A silence stretched on for so long that I started to think he had hung up, or that he had no memory of me at all. Or maybe, Emma. He said my name like it was a promise being made. I was beginning to wonder when you were going to call. I need a favor from you. The words just came tumbling out before I had a chance to stop them. I have this event tomorrow evening, this dinner party, and I need someone to go with me. It is not a question. A date, I quickly corrected myself, my face flushing with heat even though he was not there to see it. It would only be for a few hours. I know this is a huge thing to ask, and I am sure you have much more important things to be doing. But I would not be asking if I were not completely desperate. And at what time should I come and get you? I stopped my rambling halfway through the sentence. What? What time? He repeated, each word spoken with calm precision. Should I come to pick you up? 7:30. The words came out of my mouth before I could process them. But you really do not have to do this. Your address. I recited it for him, my mind reeling from the turn of events. This was completely crazy. This was beyond the definition of insane. I knew nothing about this man. I knew absolutely nothing about him, except that he traveled with bodyguards, wore incredibly expensive suits, and had eyes that seemed to see right through people. Emma. His voice deepened, becoming more intimate in a way that made my stomach perform a nervous flip. Who was it that made you feel like you needed to make this phone call? It does not matter. It matters to me. Who? Why? The question just burst out of me, full of frustration and confusion. Why do you even care? You do not know me at all. There was another long pause, and then he said, No, but I am going to. I could hear a noise in the background, someone speaking quickly in a language that sounded like it might have been Italian. I have to go now. 7:30 tomorrow. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. He ended the call before I had a chance to say another word. I just stood there, frozen in the sterile quiet of the employee break room. The phone felt heavy and cold in my hand. My mind was racing, trying to understand what I had just agreed to, and more importantly, why I had done it. But for the very first time in 6 long months, a tiny part of me felt like I might not be completely invisible after all. The following evening, I found myself in front of my closet. I stared at the sad, sparse collection of clothing hanging inside, almost praying they would somehow change into an outfit fit for a dinner at the Sterling. Of course, they refused to cooperate. My entire wardrobe consisted of 3 pairs of medical scrubs, 2 pairs of faded blue jeans, and a single black dress I had last worn to my grandmother's funeral 5 years earlier. There was also a sundress, but it had a permanent coffee stain that I had long given up trying to remove. This was the sum of my life. All of it was hanging on cheap wire hangers inside a closet that carried the faint, damp smell of mildew. His words echoed in my head. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. The truth was, I did not own a single thing that made me feel powerful. I owned clothes that made me feel invisible, which had been the entire goal for so many months. Being invisible was how I stayed safe. It was how I kept the memory of Marcus and the wreckage of his perfect life from hurting me any longer. But now, suddenly, I had to be seen. I needed to step into that exclusive restaurant, holding the arm of a man I barely knew, and act like I was a person who actually belonged in a place like that. Just then, my phone buzzed on the dresser, a sharp sound in the quiet room. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. I am sending a car for you. It will be there at 6. Be ready to go with it. My fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the screen. I started to type out questions like, "What is this?" Or "Why are you doing this?" Or the most important one, "Who gave you my private number?" Before I could hit send on any of them, a second message appeared on the screen. It only had 2 words. Trust me. Trust him. Was he serious? I had spoken to this man for maybe 15 minutes in total, and now he was asking me for my complete trust. The truly insane part was that somewhere deep inside me, a small, reckless part of me actually did. At exactly 6 post-meridiem, the buzzer for my apartment screamed. I quickly grabbed my jacket, the only coat I had that wasn't full of holes in the pockets, and I rushed downstairs. I was expecting a simple taxi, or perhaps a black town car. Instead, a massive black sport utility vehicle was idling silently at the curb. Its windows were tinted so dark they were like polished black walls of obsidian. The driver was already standing beside the rear passenger door, a huge man who looked like a mountain stuffed into a perfectly crisp black suit. The moment he saw me approach, he gave a slight professional nod and pulled the door open for me. He spoke in a low, respectful voice. "Ms. Chen, Mr. Cross is waiting for you." I stopped right there on the sidewalk, my feet feeling like they were glued to the concrete. Every single rational part of my brain was screaming at me that this is exactly how people get into trouble. This is how young women vanish without a trace. This is how they end up on the evening news, with their high school photos flashing on the screen, while some reporter uses sad words like tragedy, and nobody ever saw it coming. But I climbed into the car anyway. I did it because the only other option was to arrive at the Sterling by myself, wearing my old funeral dress, and see that smug smile on Marcus's face when he realized I had come alone after all. The inside of the vehicle smelled of rich leather, and something else I could not identify. It was an expensive scent, clean and subtle. The plush seats were heated, warming me instantly. I noticed a bottle of water was waiting for me in the cup holder, still perfectly cold with condensation on the side. We moved silently through the city as the sun went down, and the city lights began to spark to life, one by one, like a galaxy of fallen stars. I watched my own rundown neighborhood fade away, replaced by much nicer ones. I saw the buildings grow taller and their windows become cleaner. I watched as the people walking on the sidewalk started to wear clothes that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. After a while, we finally pulled up in front of a building that I had walked past 1,000 times but had never once dreamed of entering. It soared up into the twilight sky, a true monument to money and power. It was all shining glass and polished steel, radiating a kind of quiet, understated elegance. This was the kind of place where even the doorman probably earned more in a year than I did. The driver came around and opened my door. "The 7th floor. They are expecting you." They? Who was they? But he was already getting back into the driver's seat, and the large vehicle was smoothly pulling away from the curb. It left me standing all alone on the sidewalk, shivering in my jacket that was much too thin for the evening air. I felt like I had accidentally wandered into someone else's much better life. The doorman held the grand entrance open for me without me having to ask. The elevator was lined with mirrors and bathed in soft, flattering light that seemed designed to make everyone look like a better version of themselves. I watched my own reflection stretch into infinity, and I wondered if every single one of those other Emmas was as completely terrified as I was. The 7th floor had only a single imposing door. It had to be the penthouse. I slowly lifted my hand to knock, but then I paused. This was completely crazy. Before I could decide what to do, the door swung silently open. A woman was standing there, looking impossibly elegant and calm. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect, flawless chignon. She was dressed entirely in black, a simple outfit that was clearly very expensive. But when she smiled at me, a genuine warmth spread all the way to her eyes. "Emma, please come in. We do not have a lot of time." She quickly guided me inside before I even had a chance to speak. "My name is Teresa. Mr. Cross has asked me to help you prepare for this evening. The apartment? No. Calling this place an apartment would be like calling the entire ocean a small puddle. It was a penthouse. It was all sharp, clean lines and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the entire city skyline. The furniture was sparse and modern, but I knew each piece probably cost more than my car. In fact, it probably cost more than several of my cars. It probably cost more than every car I had ever owned in my entire life, all put together. "Prepare for what?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding small. "For your dinner, my dear. Now come with me. I have already selected some options for you to consider." She led me down a long hallway and into a bedroom that was easily larger than my whole studio apartment. There, on the enormous bed, 3 dresses were laid out. Each one was more stunningly beautiful than the one before it. Mr. Cross was not certain of your exact size, so I brought a few choices. We will see which one works best. My mind was completely overwhelmed, struggling to make sense of everything. Mr. Cross arranged all of this. He can be remarkably thoughtful when he chooses to be. Teresa was already lifting the first dress from the bed. It was a deep burgundy color that seemed to shimmer under the soft lights. Then she leaned in a little closer and added, "Though just between the two of us, I have never known him to go to this much effort for anyone before. You must have made a very strong impression on him. All I did was clean a small cut on his head. That was it." Her smile was patient and knowing, in a way that made a hot blush creep up my cheeks. "Let us try this one first." The dress fit me as if it had been custom-made for my body. The luxurious fabric clung to my curves in a way that my medical scrubs never could. It reminded me that I actually had a shape, a form that existed beyond just exhaustion and pure utility. The rich color of the dress brought a warmth to my skin that I had forgotten was even there. Teresa worked with a swift, practiced efficiency, as if she had done this for people 1,000 times before. She expertly pinned my hair up into a style that looked completely effortless, but was probably incredibly complicated. She applied makeup with a feather-light touch, enhancing my features instead of hiding them. When she was finally done and turned me to face the full-length mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. I did not look powerful, not exactly, but I definitely did not look invisible anymore. "Beautiful," Teresa said, and her voice was filled with genuine satisfaction. "He is going to be very, very pleased." "Where is he now?" The question tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop it. "He is finishing up some business. He will be meeting you at the restaurant." She handed me a small clutch purse that perfectly matched the dress. "Your phone and your identification are already inside." "And Emma," she said, her eyes meeting mine in the reflection of the mirror. "Do not let anyone make you feel like you are less than what you are. Not tonight, not ever again." The same black sport utility vehicle was waiting for me when I went back downstairs. This time, there was a different driver. He was just as massive as the first one, and he was just as silent. We drove through streets that I recognized, but I had never seen them like this before. Never from the quiet, protected interior of a car that cost more than I would probably make in 10 years. The Sterling appeared before us, rising up like some grand temple dedicated to pure excess. It was all warm, glowing lights and flawlessly dressed people who seemed to glide in and out of the entrance. There were valet attendants and a long red carpet, an actual red carpet that led up to heavy doors, held open by men in perfect, crisp uniforms. I had made a horrible, terrible mistake. I did not belong in a place like this. I did not belong anywhere even close to here. The driver opened my door. "Miss Chen, Mr. Cross is waiting for you inside." By some miracle, my legs managed to carry me out of the safety of the car. I walked up that red carpet and through the doors, which whispered closed behind me. The inside of the restaurant was all dark, polished wood and flickering candlelight. It had the kind of sophisticated restraint that quietly screamed of wealth so old and established it had no need to show off. A host materialized at my side almost immediately. "Ms. Chen, please come this way." He led me through the main dining area, guiding me past tables of people who looked like they spent their summers in the Hamptons and their winters in Aspen. We walked past a long bar, where a single glass of wine likely cost more than my monthly power bill. I could feel every single pair of eyes in the room on me. I could feel the crushing weight of their judgment and their silent evaluation. And in that moment, I saw him. Damien was standing in the doorway of a private room, and every thought I had scattered like dust. The suit he wore made his hospital attire seem like a distant memory. It was entirely black, tailored with an impossible precision, and the instant his gaze met mine from across the crowded space, something powerful shifted in his eyes. He began moving in my direction with a deliberate, predatory grace that caused people to part for him, a human tide receding without a conscious thought. His security detail, a new set of faces, but just as imposing, maintained their formation around him, but his focus was locked completely on me. Emma. My name was a low vibration, a sound I felt deep in my bones. His eyes performed a slow, deliberate inventory of me, from head to toe, and I watched his jaw clench. You seem a little fancy for this place? I tried to sound light-hearted, but the words escaped me in a shaky breath. Perfect, he replied, offering his arm. They are waiting for us. I wanted to ask who they were, but we were already in motion, gliding toward that private room where the sound of cheerful voices suddenly felt like a threat. I could make out a group of people gathered around a long table, a setting that looked ready for at least 20 guests. And right there, positioned at the head, was Marcus. He turned his head as we made our entrance, a smug smile already spreading across his lips, his mouth opening to unleash some sharp, humiliating comment he had prepared for my solitary arrival. But then his eyes landed on Damien, and the smile did not just fade, it shattered into a million pieces. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly white before a tide of red washed over him, only to recede into an even paler shade of shock. Marcus. Damien's tone was deceptively pleasant, almost conversational, yet it carried an undercurrent so cold it made the fine hairs on my arms stand straight up. What a lovely surprise. I was not aware this was your engagement party. Mr. Cross. Marcus's voice was a strangled, choked sound. He shot to his feet, almost sending his glass of wine crashing to the floor. We were not expecting. Emma extended an invitation, Damien stated smoothly. His hand came to rest on the small of my back, its warmth seeping through the thin material of my dress. The gesture was undeniably possessive, a claim that should have alarmed me, but instead, it sent a jolt of pure electricity through my entire body. I trust that is not an issue. A profound silence had fallen over the entire room. Every single person at that table was now staring directly at us. No, that was not right. They were staring at Damien, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and poorly hidden terror. Amber's complexion had turned ashen, her carefully constructed smile faltering under the pressure. Of course not, Marcus managed to say, though his voice trembled with the effort. You are always welcome here, both of you. Please, have a seat. Damien guided me toward two empty chairs that people abruptly scrambled to make available, nearly tripping over themselves in their haste to accommodate him. As we settled in, his hand found mine beneath the table, giving it a brief, reassuring squeeze. Just relax, he murmured, his lips so close to my ear that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. You are handling this perfectly. But I was the furthest thing from relaxed. My heart was pounding against my ribs with such force that I was convinced its frantic rhythm was audible to everyone, because I was beginning to grasp that I had stumbled into a situation far more complex and dangerous than I had ever imagined. Marcus refused to meet Damien's gaze. None of them could. They cast nervous, fleeting glances in his direction, as if he were a bomb that might detonate at any given second. Their conversations were stiff and unnatural. So, Emma, Amber began, her voice unnaturally bright and loud in the tense quiet, how do you and Mr. Cross know one another? I was his doctor in the emergency room, I answered, reaching for my water glass. I was grateful for the simple action, something to occupy my trembling hands. It was just a few days ago. How wonderful. She looked from me to Damien and back again, her confusion plainly written on her face. And you two managed to stay in contact. He left a lasting impression, Damien said, his voice as smooth as silk. His hand found mine again under the table, his fingers weaving through mine in a way that felt both casual and deeply intimate, as if this was an act they had performed 1,000 times before. Emma has a quality that stays with a person. Marcus's knuckles had turned white from gripping his wine glass so tightly. I am certain she does. There was a vile, unpleasant edge to his tone that made my stomach clench. But before I could even think of a reply, Damien's grip on my hand tightened. Just a fraction, a silent warning. "You know, Marcus," Damien began, his voice maintaining that same pleasant conversational tone, "I have been meaning to speak with you about those shipments, the ones that disappeared from the warehouse district last month." All the remaining color completely vanished from Marcus's face. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "No?" Damien's smile was razor sharp, a predatory glint in his eyes. "That is peculiar, because I happen to possess receipts that tell a very different story. Receipts that bear your signature." The atmosphere in the room felt as if it had dropped by 20 degrees. Every guest at the table had frozen in place, like a herd of deer sensing a wolf in their midst. "There has to be some kind of mistake," Marcus insisted, but his voice was now barely a whisper. "Oh, there was certainly a mistake," Damien confirmed, leaning back in his chair and radiating an aura of casual menace. "The mistake was your assumption that I would not notice, your belief that I would not care." His gaze flicked to me for a brief second before returning to Marcus. "The mistake was thinking you could treat people as if they were disposable." And in that instant, it all became terrifyingly clear. This was never about missing shipments or business deals. This entire confrontation was about me. It was about how Marcus had treated me, about the humiliation he had put me through. Damien had orchestrated all of this on my behalf. The weight of that realization struck me with the force of a physical impact. This incredibly dangerous, powerful man, a man I barely knew, had arranged this entire elaborate evening simply because someone had caused me pain. Because Marcus had made me feel insignificant, isolated, and completely worthless. "Mr. Cross," Marcus was pleading now, his voice filled with desperation, "I can explain everything." "I am sure you could," Damien said, as he rose to his feet, gently pulling me up with him. "But frankly, I am no longer interested in hearing your excuses. Emma and I have more important places to be." He steered me toward the exit, leading me past the stunned and silent guests, past a pale and trembling Marcus, who looked as if he was about to be physically ill. At the doorway, Damien paused for a moment and looked back. "Congratulations on the engagement," he said, his voice laced with ice. "I sincerely hope you appreciate what you have. Not everyone is granted a second chance." And then we were gone, walking through the main restaurant where every head turned to watch us pass. His hand never left the small of my back, a warm, constant pressure that somehow kept me moving forward when my own legs felt as if they had turned to water. The black sport utility vehicle was waiting for us right outside. This time, he opened the passenger door himself, his guards standing back at a respectful distance, and I slid into the leather seat as if in a daze. He followed me inside, and the door closed with a solid thud, encasing us in a world of our own. A heavy silence filled the space between us as the driver pulled away from the curb, the city lights beginning to streak past the tinted windows in a blur. "I do not understand," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding foreign and thin to my own ears. "What just happened back there? Who are you, really?" Damien turned to look at me, and in the dim, shifting light of the vehicle's interior, his eyes were like pools of darkness, reflecting nothing. "I am someone who dislikes seeing good people get hurt." "That is not a real answer," I countered. "No, it is not," he conceded. He reached up and loosened his tie with a smooth, effortless gesture that felt strangely intimate. "The complete truth, Emma Chen, is that I am the kind of man you should probably be very afraid of." "Then why am I not afraid?" The question escaped my lips as a fragile whisper. His hand came up, and his fingers brushed against my cheek with a tenderness that was completely unexpected. "That," he said softly, "is what worries me the most." The sport utility vehicle came to a smooth stop. I glanced out the window and a jolt went through me when I realized we were not at my apartment building. We were parked in front of his, the towering structure with the penthouse that overlooked the entire city. "I cannot," I started to say, my voice failing me. "I am not inviting you to come up," he interrupted gently. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, and an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. I am asking you to permit me to ensure you arrive home safely. That building where you live, Emma, the locks are broken. The security is a complete joke. Absolutely anyone could just walk right inside. How do you know where I live? I asked, alarmed. I make it my business to know important things, he replied, his voice even. He lowered his hand, but I could still feel the phantom sensation of his touch on my skin, especially when those things concern people who matter to me. I do not matter to you. We have only just met. Yes, he said, his gaze locking with mine, intense and unwavering. You do. And no, we have not. Before I could process his cryptic words or ask what he meant, he was already getting out of the vehicle, circling around to offer me his hand. Acting against every single instinct for self-preservation that I possessed, I took it. His penthouse felt entirely different at night. The city lights were a glittering carpet of stars spread out far below us, and the vast space seemed alive with shadows and unspoken secrets. Damien's guards had vanished the very instant we stepped inside the elevator, melting away to whatever unseen posts people like them occupy when they are not actively needed. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping my arms around my body, even though the room was perfectly warm. From behind me, I could hear him moving about the living space, followed by the soft clink of a glass being set on a hard surface. Here, he said, appearing suddenly at my side with a tumbler filled with a rich amber liquid. You are trembling. I am fine, I insisted, but I accepted the glass from him anyway. I let the sharp burn of the expensive whiskey travel down my throat, hoping it would steady my frayed nerves. Why did you do all of that tonight? You were in need of assistance, he stated simply. I provided it. He came to stand next to me at the window, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, though he made no move to touch me. That is the entire story. No, that is not all of it, I countered, turning to face him directly. You completely destroyed him. Marcus looked like he was on the verge of collapsing. I had to know. What did he actually take from you? A muscle in Damien's jaw twitched. Does it truly matter? Yes, it does, because I have to know if I have just involved myself in something incredibly dangerous. If Marcus is now going to... I trailed off, unable to voice the terrible thought that had formed in my mind. Marcus is not going to do a single thing. Damien's voice was utterly certain, leaving no room for doubt. He understands precisely what happens to individuals who decide to cross me. What you witnessed tonight, Emma, was an act of mercy. It was a clear warning, delivered instead of something much, much worse. Those words should have sent a wave of terror through me. Instead, they settled deep within my chest with the undeniable weight of a truth I felt I had always known on some primal level. This man was a dangerous force of nature. This man wielded a kind of power that extended far beyond mere wealth or social influence, and somehow, impossibly, he was choosing to use that formidable power to keep me safe. I should get home, I said, setting the now empty glass down on a nearby table with fingers that shook. This was a mistake. All of this. Was it? He asked, moving a step closer. Suddenly, I found myself with my back pressed against the cold, hard glass of the window, the chill of it a shocking sensation against my spine. Tell me you did not feel a sense of satisfaction watching him crumble. Tell me you did not feel a profound sense of relief when you walked into that room on my arm, instead of having to face him all by yourself. That is not the issue here. No, that is precisely the issue. His hand moved, resting against the cool glass of the window next to my head, boxing me in. You made a call because you were in trouble and needed someone. I answered that call because I wanted to be the person you turned to. Where exactly is the mistake in that? You know nothing about me. I know that you work until you are completely exhausted in a hospital that takes you for granted. I know you volunteer for the overnight shifts that nobody else wants, simply because you cannot afford to say no. And I know that someone hurt you so badly that 6 months later, you still pull away whenever anyone gets too close to you. His intense eyes searched my face. I know that you are so much stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emma Chen. My breath hitched in my throat. How could you possibly know all of those things about me? I already told you. I make it my business to know things. He leaned just a little closer, and I could smell his cologne, a mix of leather and something else that was uniquely his. I especially make it my business to know about people who capture my interest. Why do I interest you? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. A slow smile touched his lips, but there was absolutely no humor in it. That, he said softly, is what I am still trying to determine. The moment between us stretched on, filled with a dangerous electric tension. Then, the shrill ring of my phone shattered the silence like breaking glass. I fumbled inside the small clutch that Teresa had given me, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. The name Marcus flashed brightly on the screen. "Do not answer that," Damien said, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. But I was already swiping my finger across the screen to accept the call. "What?" "Emma, please, you need to listen to me right now." Marcus's voice was high-pitched and laced with panic. "I have no idea what you said to Cross, but you have to fix it. You have to call him back and tell him it was all just a big misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding, Marcus. Emma, I am begging you. He is going to destroy me. He is going to ruin everything I have ever built, everything I have worked so hard for." "You mean everything that you stole?" The words came out of me, cold and hard as ice, surprising even myself. "Everything you built on lies. I never—" He stopped himself, and I could hear the sound of his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Look, what happened with us, that was a personal matter. This is about business. You should not be mixing the two of them. You were the one who mixed them, Marcus. You targeted them first, showing up at my job just to humiliate me. I was not trying to put you down. I was attempting to be thoughtful, to include you by confirming I would be arriving by myself. You did it by reminding me that I have absolutely no one." My voice climbed, breaking despite my every effort to control it. "You wanted me to feel precisely this way, Marcus. You wanted me to feel small, pathetic, and completely invisible. Do not dare pretend that was not your goal." Just then, Damien's hand entered my field of view. He held it palm up. It was a silent, simple request. I lifted my eyes to his, and I saw something there that made the choice incredibly easy. I placed the phone in his hand. "Marcus." His voice was like smooth silk draped over sharpened steel. "Let me make something perfectly clear to you. You are going to leave Emma entirely alone. You will not call her, you will not text her, and you will not acknowledge her existence in any way, shape, or form. If I learn that you have so much as glanced in her direction, I promise you that what took place tonight will feel like a pleasant memory in comparison. Do you understand me?" I was not able to hear what Marcus said in response, but I watched Damien's expression grow hard as stone. "Your engagement is the absolute least of your worries at this moment. My suggestion is that you start focusing on how you plan to explain the significant discrepancies in your accounts to your business partners. From what I hear, they are not nearly as forgiving as I am." He disconnected the call and passed my phone back to me. "He is not going to bother you ever again. You did not have to do all of that for me." "Yes, Emma, I did." He then stepped away from me, creating a space between us that somehow felt even more suffocating than when he stood close. "I think you should stay here for the night." "What?" "It is getting very late. You are clearly exhausted. The guest room is fully prepared and has everything you could possibly need." He was already turning and walking toward the hallway. "Teresa left some clothes for you inside the closet." "Damien." He paused with his back still facing me. "I am not asking you to come to my bed, Emma. I am asking you to allow me to take care of you. You need to understand, there is a profound difference." "Why?" The single word exploded from my lips like a desperate confession. "Why do you care so deeply about what happens to me?" He turned around with a slow, deliberate motion, and the expression on his face made my heart stumble in my chest. Because when I first saw you in that hospital, you were working yourself straight into the ground. You were so tired you could barely even stand on your own 2 feet. And yet, you still treated me with genuine kindness. You had no idea who I was. You did not care about my status or my name. You simply saw a person who was in need of help, and so you helped them. He took one deliberate step closer to me. Do you have any idea how incredibly rare that is in the world I live in? I was only doing my job. No. You were being a human being in a way that most people seem to have forgotten how to be. He took another step forward. You showed me a way of being that I had forgotten even existed. The very air that separated us crackled with a charged, dangerous energy. I knew I should have turned and left right then. I should have insisted that he take me home. Instead, I was shocked to hear myself ask, "Where is the guest room?" A flicker of relief washed over his features, but it vanished so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. Follow me. The guest room was stunning, possessing the same beautiful, understated elegance as the rest of the penthouse. The bed appeared impossibly soft and welcoming, and through the massive windows, the entire city glittered below us like a field of scattered diamonds, a silent promise. "There is a full bathroom right through there," Damien said, gesturing toward an unmarked door. "There are clothes in the closet for you. As I said, if you find you need anything at all, my room is just down the hall." He began to turn to leave, but I reached out and my fingers caught his arm. "Thank you for everything you did tonight. For all of it." His hand gently came up to cover mine where it still rested on his sleeve. "Get some sleep now, Emma. We can talk more in the morning." Long after he had gone, I remained standing in the middle of the enormous room, trying to make sense of everything that had just occurred. The beautiful dress, the incredible dinner, the hateful look on Marcus's face, the power in Damien's words. It all swirled and mixed together in my mind, feeling like a strange and confusing fever dream. I found silk pajamas in the closet and changed into them. Of course, they fit my body perfectly. I slid between the bedsheets, which felt as soft as summer clouds against my skin. I should have been far too wound up to sleep, completely overwhelmed by the chaos of the day. But instead, my eyes closed, and I fell asleep almost instantly. And for the very first time in so many months, I did not dream about Marcus, or about the baby I had lost, or about the perfect life that had slipped right through my fingers like running water. I awoke to the bright morning sunlight streaming through windows I did not recognize and the rich, welcoming smell of fresh coffee. For a brief, disoriented second, I could not remember where I was. And then the memories of the night before came rushing back into my mind all at once. I found Damien in the kitchen, dressed in casual dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that, against all logic, made him look more imposing and dangerous, not less. He was intently reading something on his phone, holding a cup of coffee in his other hand. "Good morning," I said, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness in the borrowed silk pajamas. He looked up from his screen, and the intensity in his eyes instantly softened. "Morning. Coffee, please." He poured me a cup from an expensive machine that probably cost more than my entire car, and then handed it to me in a heavy ceramic mug that felt perfectly weighted in my hands. I took a small sip and almost moaned aloud. It was without a doubt the best coffee I had ever tasted in my life. "I really should get going," I said, even as a significant part of me wanted to stay in this beautiful, peaceful sanctuary forever. "I have to work a shift tonight." "I will have a driver take you," he replied, setting his phone down on the counter and giving me his complete, undivided attention. "But before you go, we need to talk." My stomach plummeted. About what? About what is going to happen next? He leaned his body back against the marble counter, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. "Marcus is not the type of man who is going to let this go quietly. He is going to search for ways to get back at both of us. But I do not have anything that he could possibly want. You have the ability to testify about what you know. You know about his business dealings, about his illegal contacts. Damien's jaw tightened with tension. And more importantly, you have my full attention, which makes you a valuable asset in ways you cannot even begin to understand yet. I do not know anything about his business dealings, but he does not know that for certain. He moved closer to me then. And what that means is that you are going to need protection. I cannot afford to pay for protection. I am not asking you to pay for it. His hand came up, and his fingers gently tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear. I am offering it to you freely. Why? I took a step back, needing physical space to be able to think clearly. Why would you possibly do something like that for me? Because, he paused, and some unreadable emotion flickered across his face. Because the people who matter to me do not get hurt. That is simply how this works. I do not want to matter to you. The lie felt like ash and tasted bitter on my tongue. I do not want to be any part of whatever kind of world you live in. It is too late for that. His voice was gentle, yet the words were absolute and final. You became a part of my world the moment you decided to call me. You became part of it the moment you allowed me to walk into that restaurant with you at your side. He closed the remaining distance that separated us again. You became a part of it the moment I decided that you were mine to protect. I am not yours. No, he readily agreed. Not yet. Those two words hung in the air between us, heavy with both a solemn promise and a dangerous threat in equal measure. My phone began to buzz from the bedroom, and I knew it was probably the hospital calling, wondering where I was. Real life was calling me back from this strange dream. I have to go, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I know. But he did not move out of my way. He did not let me pass. Emma, I need you to understand something very important. My world is a dangerous place. The people who exist in it do not play by any normal rules. If you choose to stay close to me, that danger will extend to you. Then I will stay away from you. Will you? Really? His intense eyes searched my face. Because I do not think either one of us actually believes that anymore. He was right. God help me. He was absolutely right. Something profound had shifted between us. It was something I did not fully understand, but also could not possibly deny. When he looked at me, I no longer felt invisible. I felt seen, truly seen, in a way that was both deeply terrifying and incredibly exhilarating all at once. Let me protect you, he said again, his voice now soft and pleading. At least just until this whole situation with Marcus finally settles down. Then, if you still want to walk away from me, I swear I will not try to stop you. You promise? A sad, knowing smile touched his lips. I promise that I will try. It was not the perfect answer that I wanted to hear, but it was honest. And somehow, in that moment, his honesty mattered more than anything else. Okay, I heard myself say, surprising myself. Okay. The following 2 weeks moved by in a strange blur of forced normalcy, which was punctuated by small, jarring moments that constantly reminded me that my life had been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. Damien kept his distance for the most part, but his influence, his presence, was suddenly everywhere. The broken locks on my old apartment building were professionally fixed overnight. A brand new, state-of-the-art security system appeared in my studio, installed by a team of efficient, silent men who never asked a single question. My landlord suddenly remembered that he had been meaning to fix that leaking faucet in my kitchen for months. And no matter where I went, I felt it. I could feel their eyes on me. They were not a threat but a shield. His men were always there, hidden in the background, ensuring my safety. This constant surveillance should have felt suffocating, like I was in a cage. Instead, after months of looking over my shoulder, it felt like I could finally take a deep, full breath. Marcus had honored his word, or more accurately, Damien's very clear threat had forced him into silence. There were no more calls, no unexpected messages, No sudden appearances at the hospital. I learned from Sarah that the failed engagement party was the hottest gossip on the social scene. Everyone was talking about the exact moment Damian Cross appeared with me on his arm and how Marcus looked like he was about to faint. "Who is he, Emma?" Sarah had pressed me over a cup of terrible cafeteria coffee. And more importantly, how do I get one for myself? I just laughed and deflected. I offered vague explanations about him being a helpful friend, insisting it was nothing serious. But later, at night, when I was alone in my apartment behind my new deadbolts and upgraded security system, my thoughts would drift. I would think about his dark, intense eyes and his surprisingly gentle hands. I would remember a voice that made promises I was not entirely sure I wanted him to keep. He sent me messages sometimes, always simple things. He would ask, "Did you eat today?" Or he would ask how my shift went. The questions should have felt casual, but they carried a weight I could not ignore, a sense of something much deeper. I always replied. I convinced myself it was just common courtesy, a way to show my gratitude for his assistance. I was not prepared to acknowledge that it might be something more. 2 weeks and 3 days after that disastrous dinner, I was covering a rare day shift when my phone started to ring. The number was unfamiliar, but a strange instinct told me to answer it. "Emma Chen?" a woman's voice inquired, sounding professional and detached. "Yes," I answered. "This is Jennifer Walsh from the billing department at St. Catherine's. I am calling in regard to your outstanding balance." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I had been deliberately pushing away thoughts of the hospital bills from the miscarriage, the ones that had accumulated far faster than I could ever hope to pay them. "I am on a payment plan," I stated. "Yes, I can see that noted here. I am actually calling you to inform you that your balance has been completely paid in full." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What did you say?" "Your account shows a payment of $47,322, which was received yesterday. I simply wanted to confirm I did not authorize that payment." My voice sounded thin and strained, barely a whisper. "Who paid it?" "The payment originated from Cross Industries." "If you believe there has been an error," I ended the call without another word. My hands were shaking so violently that the phone felt slick and I nearly dropped it. He had settled my entire medical debt. He did it without asking me, without even telling me. In one single act, he had erased a financial burden that would have taken me years, maybe even a decade, to clear. A part of me knew I should feel relief, gratitude. Instead, a wave of pure fury washed over me. My official break was not for another 2 hours, but I immediately found Dr. Patterson and told him I had to leave. I claimed a family emergency. He took a single look at my pale, set face and simply nodded, asking no questions. I already had Damien's address saved in my phone, a fact I had never been willing to admit to myself. The taxi ride to his apartment building felt like it stretched for an eternity, my anger escalating with every city block we passed. By the time I arrived at his building, I was practically vibrating with rage. The doorman recognized me from my last visit and waved me through without a single question. The silent elevator ride up to the 7th floor felt like a slow descent into a battle. I hammered on his front door with my fist, hard enough that my knuckles ached. The door swung open almost instantly. Damien stood there, dressed in expensive slacks and a dress shirt that was only partially buttoned, clearly in the middle of getting ready to go somewhere. His eyes widened just a little when he saw the look on my face. "Emma, you had no right to do that." I stormed right past him into the vast penthouse. "You had no right to do that without even asking me." He shut the door softly behind me, his expression becoming unreadable, a carefully constructed mask. "I assume you are talking about the hospital bills." "Of course I am talking about the hospital bills. That was almost $50,000, Damien. $50,000 that you just casually threw at my problems as if it meant absolutely nothing to you. It is nothing." He started moving toward me, his steps slow and deliberate, the way one might approach a frightened, wounded animal. "Emma, you were drowning under the weight of that debt. I had the ability to help you, so I did. I never asked you to help me.
You should never have to ask for help.
His voice grew louder, finally matching the intensity of mine. You spend all your energy taking care of everyone else. You care for every single patient who walks through those emergency room doors. You help every person who needs you. But who is there to take care of you? I take care of myself. I have always taken care of myself. And look where that has gotten you. He gestured toward me, his legendary control finally starting to crack at the edges. You work yourself into the ground for a hospital that pays you just enough to get by. You live in an apartment that is not even safe. You are lucky if you remember to eat one meal a day. That is not taking care of yourself, Emma. That is just surviving. Maybe surviving is the only thing I can afford right now, but it is not all that you deserve. He finally closed the distance between us. His hands came up to gently frame my face. Do you not understand yet? You deserve so much more than the life you have settled for. Hot tears burned the backs of my eyes, and I hated them for their weakness. I hated that they were betraying me. You cannot just fix all of my problems with your money. That is not how the real world works. I know that. His thumbs gently brushed away the tears that had begun to escape, despite my efforts to hold them back. But money is what I have, Emma. And if I am able to use it to make your life even a little bit easier, to lift some of that weight from your shoulders, why in the world would I not do that? Because I do not want to be in your debt. I do not want to owe you anything. Something flickered in his dark eyes. It might have been hurt, or maybe it was disappointment. Is that really what you think this is about? Some kind of business transaction, isn't it? You help me, and in return, I what? What is it that you want from me, Damien? I want you to stop working yourself into an early grave. I want you to eat 3 meals a day and sleep in a place where you feel safe. And I want you to stop looking like you are about to shatter into a million pieces every single time someone gets close to you. His hand slid from my face down to my shoulders, his grip firm yet incredibly gentle. I want you to let me care about you without you questioning my motives every single time I do something for you. Why? The question ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. Why do you care so much? You do not even know me. I know enough. His voice dropped, becoming intense and urgent. I know that you are so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know that you feel everything so deeply, even when you try to pretend that you do not. I know that when you smile, when you truly smile, not that tired fake one you use at work, it feels like the sun is breaking through the clouds. He pulled me even closer. And I know that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the very moment you touched me in that hospital. And frankly, it terrifies me. His confession hung in the air between us, charged and dangerous like lightning about to strike. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that I could not control, and I could not tell if it was from fear or from something else entirely. This is crazy, I whispered, my voice shaking. We are crazy. Probably, he agreed, his forehead now resting against mine. Does that really change anything? It should have changed everything. Nothing about our situation made any logical sense. Not his sudden and intense interest in me, not the confusing and powerful way he made me feel, and certainly not the dangerous world he was a part of, a world that I was somehow being pulled into. But logic had nothing to do with the way my body was reacting to his closeness, or the way my hands had somehow moved on their own to rest on his chest, feeling the thunder of his heartbeat under my palms. I do not know how to do this, I admitted in a small voice. I do not know how to let someone get close to me again. Then we will figure it out together. He pulled back just enough so that our eyes could meet. But before we do anything else, you need to understand something very important. When I help you, when I fix a problem or pay for something or arrange for your protection, I am not expecting anything back from you. This is not a ledger. I am not keeping score. I am doing it because seeing you struggle when I have the power to ease that struggle causes me a kind of physical pain. That is not normal, Damien. No, it is not. A small, sad smile touched his lips. But I stopped being normal a very long time ago, Emma. The real question is whether or not you can accept that. Could I accept it? Could I accept a man who paid nearly $50,000 of my debt without asking? A man who had his guards follow me just to make sure I was safe? A man who looked at me as if I were something both precious and terrifying at the very same time? Could I accept the inevitable danger that came with him? The universe of shadows and violence that was hidden beneath his expensive suits and gentle, careful touches. I am scared, I whispered, the admission costing me everything. Good. That means you are smart. His hands moved down to my waist, anchoring me to him. I am scared too, if that makes you feel any better. Of what? Of how much I already care about you. Of what I might be willing to do to keep you safe. His eyes darkened with a frightening intensity. Of how far I would be willing to go if someone ever tried to hurt you again. The words were meant to be a warning. They should have sent me running. Instead, they felt like a solemn promise. A promise that settled deep inside my bones and felt more real than anything I had known in a long time. I need some time, I said. I need time to think about all of this, to figure out what it is I really want. You can take all the time you need. But his hands tightened just a fraction on my waist, a silent message. Just promise me that you will stay safe while you are thinking. Your people are still watching me every single moment. There was no apology in his voice, only a statement of fact. Does that bother you? It should have bothered me. It should have felt like an invasion. No, I admitted softly. It makes me feel protected. A fierce, possessive look flashed across his handsome face. Good. We stood there together in his massive penthouse, wrapped in each other's arms, with the entire city glittering below. The city skyline spread out before us, a glittering tapestry of endless chances. In that moment, for the very first time since Marcus had systematically dismantled my entire existence, I felt a flicker of something new. It was not the familiar ache of pain, nor the heavy cloak of exhaustion, or the gray veil of numbness. It was the sharp, undeniable sensation of being alive. Then my phone vibrated, its buzz slicing through the fragile peace. I pulled back from Damien with a sigh, my eyes falling to the screen. It was Sarah. Her text asking if I was all right, gently reminding me that I had fled my shift without a single word of explanation. I need to leave, I murmured, the reality of my life crashing back in. I have to face my job. I have to explain why I vanished. He stopped me. I will arrange for a driver to take you. His name is Damien. When I tried to protest, he captured my hand, bringing my knuckles to his lips. The gesture was so wonderfully old world it should have felt absurd, but instead it stole the air from my lungs. Please, allow me this one small courtesy. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. He escorted me to the door, his palm resting warmly on the small of my back. It was a touch that felt like both a claim and a profound comfort all at once. At the threshold, I paused and turned. The hospital bills. Thank you. Even though I am still angry about the way you handled it, I am deeply grateful. It was suffocating you. I understand. A soft, genuine smile touched his lips. That is precisely why I did it. The black sport utility vehicle was already waiting for me downstairs. It was the exact same driver who had collected me for that catastrophic dinner, the night that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. He offered me a brief, respectful nod in the rearview mirror, and to my own surprise, I found a small smile returning the gesture. My phone began to ring just as we merged into the city's pulsing traffic. It was another unknown number, but this one was different from the persistent calls from the hospital's billing office. A man's voice, raspy and completely unfamiliar, spoke my name. Hello, Emma Chen. You must stop seeing Damien Cross. For your own well-being, I am telling you to walk away from him right now. A chill snaked down my spine, turning my blood to ice. Who is this? I demanded. I am someone attempting to save your life, Cross is a dangerous man. He is far more dangerous than you could possibly imagine. The people who get close to him have a habit of ending up dead, or in a state far worse than death. If you have any sense, you will disappear before he concludes that you know too much. With that, the line went dead. I sat there in the back of the car, completely frozen, the phone still clutched in my trembling hand. The driver's concerned eyes met mine in the mirror. "Is everything all right, Miss Chen?" Was anything all right? Absolutely nothing about my life felt okay any longer. I had unintentionally wandered into a world far larger and infinitely more perilous than I had ever comprehended. I had no concept of how deep these dangerous waters ran, or if I had already waded in too far to ever find my way back to the shore. But as the car moved through the familiar city streets, gliding past the hospital where I had spent countless hours feeling completely invisible, past the old apartment building with its faulty locks and perpetually dripping faucet, a critical realization dawned on me. I did not want to go back. No matter what was coming next, no matter what kind of dangers were hiding in the shadows of Damien's world, I was done with merely surviving. For the very first time in my entire life, I wanted to truly live, even if living was the very thing that might end me. I decided not to tell Damien about that ominous phone call, at least not immediately. Instead, I returned to work, offered a reassuring smile to Sarah's worried inquiries, and threw myself into my next shift with a fierce concentration born from a desperate need not to think too deeply about anything at all. But the man's chilling words echoed in my mind, people around him end up dead, or worse. 3 days went by. 3 days filled with routine shifts, carefully constructed smiles, and the constant pretense that everything was perfectly fine. 3 days of receiving texts from Damien, which I found myself answering with a growing, surprising honesty. 3 days of feeling the presence of his security detail, not as a cage, but as a comforting shadow. I spent 3 days trying to lie to myself that I could walk away from all of this whenever I chose to. On the fourth day, my fragile world shattered. I was leaving the hospital after a grueling night shift, my body aching with exhaustion, and my mind focused only on my bed, when I saw him. It was Marcus. He was propped against a car across the street, his attention fixed on the employee entrance with an intensity that made my stomach plummet. I froze right there on the steps, every survival instinct screaming at me to turn around and run back inside the safety of the hospital. But it was too late. He had already spotted me. He was pushing himself off the car, his strides purposeful and menacing as he crossed the street. "Emma," he said, his voice grating. "We have to talk." I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling. "Damien explicitly told you to stay away from me." I was ready to dial, but who was I even calling? The police? Or Damien's guards, who I knew were somewhere in the vicinity? "This is important," Marcus insisted, his voice strained. "It is about Cross." He looked awful. Deep, dark circles were etched under his eyes, and his normally pristine appearance was a mess. "Please, Emma, just 5 minutes." Against every rational thought in my head, I found myself nodding. 5 minutes. We will talk right here, where everyone can see us." He shot a nervous glance around the street, as if he expected an enemy to materialize from the early morning shadows. Perhaps he did. "You have no idea what kind of situation you have walked into," he hissed. "Cross is not the person you believe him to be." "I know exactly who he is," I countered. "Do you really?" Marcus let out a bitter, sharp laugh. "Do you know about the warehouse fire back in 2019? The one that killed 3 people? Are you aware of the shipments that move through his docks that are not exactly legal? Or about the way people who defy him have a tendency to simply vanish?" My mouth had gone completely dry, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "If he is so dangerous, then why are you still alive? Because I am useful to him, because I possess information that he still needs." Marcus took a step closer, and for the first time, I saw the raw fear in his eyes. It was genuine, heart-stopping terror. "But you, Emma, you are a liability. You know about me, you know about the engagement party, You know about the way he operates. Once you are no longer useful, he will get rid of you. That is enough. The voice came from directly behind me. It was deep, cold, and vibrating with an absolute, unrestrained fury. I whirled around to see Damien stepping out of a black sport utility vehicle that I hadn't even registered pulling up to the curb. He moved with a lethal sense of purpose, his guards flanking him on either side, and the expression on his face sent a wave of ice through my veins. Marcus's face went completely pale. Cross, I was just threatening her, Damien finished for him, his hand finding the small of my back, that possessive, grounding touch I had already come to recognize. After I gave you an explicit command to stay away from her, I was just warning her. She has a right to know the truth. What she deserves, Damien interrupted, his voice lowering to a dangerously quiet tone, is to be left alone by the men who have already caused her more than enough pain. He then glanced at his guards. Escort Mr. Hayes to his vehicle. Make certain he understands that if he ever approaches Emma again, our entire business arrangement is terminated. Marcus's face seemed to crumble in on itself. Please, the engagement is over. I have already lost half of my clients because of this. Amber's family refuses to have anything to do with me anymore. Those are consequences, Damien stated simply. They are the results of your actions. You should be grateful they are not significantly worse. His guards moved forward, and Marcus stumbled back, all of his earlier bravado completely evaporated. You are making a terrible mistake, Emma, he yelled as they guided him away. He will destroy you just like he destroys everyone else he touches. Then he was gone, unceremoniously pushed into his car, which sped away from the curb as if the devil himself were in pursuit. I remained frozen on the hospital steps, my heart pounding against my ribs, struggling to process the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. Damien's hand was still resting on my back, a steady, solid pressure that somehow anchored me to reality. How long were you watching? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Long enough. He gently turned me to face him, his intense eyes searching my own. Are you all right? I do not know. It was the only honest answer I could give. Is it true? What he said about the fire, and the illegal shipments, and the people who have disappeared? Damien's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Yes. That single stark word struck me with the force of a physical blow. A foolish part of me had desperately hoped he would deny it all, that he would laugh it off as the ramblings of a desperate man, that he would tell me Marcus was lying, but he did not. Instead, he gave me the unvarnished truth. It was sharp, and it was brutal. I am not a good man, Emma. His hands rose to gently frame my face, his touch surprisingly tender. I have done things that would make you sick. I have hurt people, and I have destroyed lives without a second thought. I exist in a world where violence is a form of currency, and loyalty is something purchased with fear. Then why help me? Because you are different. His thumbs gently brushed across my cheekbones. Because when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to want to be a better person. Not a good one. I will never be a good man, but better than what I am. Hot tears started to burn my eyes. I received a phone call 3 days ago. It was someone warning me to stay away from you. His expression immediately darkened. Why did you not tell me? Because I was terrified you would do something horrible to whoever it was. Because I was trying to figure out if they were right about you. I covered his hands with my own, feeling the warmth of his skin. Because I am terrified, Damien. I am terrified of you, and of your world, and of how much I already care about you in spite of all of it. You should be. He pulled me even closer until there was barely any space between us. Everything that Marcus said is the truth. I am a dangerous man. Just being with me puts you at risk. The intelligent thing for you to do would be to walk away from me right now and never look back. I know, but you are not going to do that, are you? A flicker of something that looked like hope ignited in his dark eyes. No. The word left my lips feeling steady and certain. Because I have been safe my entire life. And where did that safety get me? It got me a man who discarded me the second I became an inconvenience. It got me a job that pays me just enough to barely get by. It got me an existence that felt more like slowly drowning than actually living. I took a final step forward, closing the remaining distance between our bodies completely. Maybe danger is exactly what I need. Maybe you are what I need. At that, his control finally snapped. His mouth came down on mine in a kiss that was nothing like gentle and nothing close to careful. It was a raw mix of possession and promise and pure desperation, all woven together. And I kissed him back with every ounce of strength I possessed, pouring 6 long months of pain and loneliness and paralyzing fear into the powerful connection that erupted between us. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily, and he rested his forehead against mine. If you choose to stay with me, I cannot promise that you will be safe. I cannot promise that your life will be easy. The only thing I can promise is that I will protect you with everything that I am. I promise that anyone who ever tries to hurt you will have to answer to me. And I promise that you will never, ever be invisible again. That is enough. And it truly was. God help me, it was. That is more than enough for me. Come home with me. It was not a question, but it was not quite a command either. It was an invitation. It was an offering. It was a plea to stay. I should have said no. I should have asked for time, for more space, for some tiny piece of rationality in this completely insane situation. Instead of arguing, I simply gave a nod. His penthouse had a different energy this time around. Or perhaps the change was within me. I was no longer an outsider stepping into his world. I felt a sense of belonging here. As soon as we were inside, Damien's security team vanished without a word, granting us complete privacy in the enormous space overlooking the city. There is something you need to grasp, Damien said, his voice serious. He guided me toward the same wall of windows where we had stood weeks before. My adversaries will look at you and see a vulnerability. They will attempt to manipulate you as a way to wound me. You will face threats, genuine threats, and I cannot guarantee I can shield you from all of it. I get it. Are you sure? He gently turned me around so I was facing him directly. Because once you belong to me, truly and completely, there is no turning back. I do not share what is mine, Emma, and I never let go. If you give me this part of yourself, I will own it, and I will not be gentle in its keeping. Those words were supposed to terrify me, but instead, they sparked a fire deep inside my chest, a feeling that was undeniably close to pure desire. Show me, I whispered. His eyes darkened with intensity. Emma, show me exactly what it means to be yours. I lifted my hands, my fingers slowly unfastening the buttons of his tailored shirt. I am done with being cautious, I said, my voice steady. I am so tired of living in fear. Show me what comes next when I finally decide to stop running away. For a long second, he just looked down at me, his expression one of complete disbelief, as if he could not process what I was saying. And then, his legendary self-control just shattered into a million pieces. He kissed me with an intensity that felt like he was trying to devour me whole. His hands were everywhere at once, gripping my waist, tracing the line of my back, burying themselves in my hair. I met his fervor with my own, pulling at the fabric of his shirt until buttons popped and scattered across the polished floor. My hands explored his skin, which was burning hot and powerfully solid beneath my touch. You are absolutely certain? He managed to breathe against my lips, his voice rough. I am certain. I had never been more sure of anything in my entire life. In one fluid motion, he lifted me into his arms, carrying me down the long hallway toward his bedroom. We went past the guest room this time. He took me to his own space, his private territory. The bed was massive, covered in dark silk sheets that felt incredibly cool against my feverish skin as he gently laid me down upon them. I need you to say the words, he commanded, his powerful body covering mine. His weight was both perfect and wonderfully overwhelming. Tell me that you are mine. I am yours, I said, and the words tasted like absolute freedom on my tongue. I am yours, Damien. What followed between us was not tender. It was a raw act of possession, a mutual claiming between two people who had been circling one another for weeks, finally surrendering to a force that was inevitable. He paid tribute to my body with his hands and his mouth, memorizing every sound that I made. He pushed me higher and further until I finally broke apart in his arms. And when he at last entered me, when our bodies moved together in a perfect unspoken rhythm, it felt like I had finally come home to a place I never even knew I had been searching for. Later, we were a tangle of limbs, the distant city lights casting shifting patterns across our bare skin. His fingers drew slow, lazy circles on my shoulder, and I felt a profound sense of peace for the first time in months. I was serious about what I said, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my hair. You belong to me now. I will eliminate anyone who even thinks of taking you away from me. That statement should probably frighten me more than it actually does. His chest vibrated with a soft, quiet laugh. It probably should, he agreed, pulling me in even closer against him. Move in with me. I lifted my head from his chest to stare at him, stunned. What? Your apartment is no longer safe. From here, I can offer you real protection. Here, you will have access to everything you could possibly want or need. His hand came up to gently cup my face, his gaze intense. Here, you can always be with me. Just give me your answer. Just say yes. His thumb lightly brushed against my lips. Allow me to care for you in the way you have always deserved. Let me provide the kind of life that Marcus was supposed to give you. I do not want Marcus's life. No, he said, a genuine warm smile spreading across his face. You want something much better, so permit me to give it to you. The pace of it all was too quick, the offer too immense, the feeling too overwhelming. It was everything, all at once. But as I looked into his eyes and saw the unwavering certainty there, the ferocious urge to protect, and the possessive need, I heard myself agreeing. Yes. That single word reset the entire course of my life. Within 7 days, the few possessions I owned were moved into his breathtaking penthouse. Within 14 days, I had officially terminated the lease on my old apartment. Within a single month, I had scaled back my work schedule at the hospital. I now worked an almost sensible number of hours, because Damien flatly refused to stand by and watch me work myself into an early grave. Marcus vanished from my world entirely. I did hear some whispers that he had fled the city, relocating to some distant place where the influence of Damien Cross could not possibly reach him. Amber had apparently abandoned him even before he left, taking her family's wealth and all their valuable connections with her. I knew I was supposed to feel a pang of guilt about it all. I felt nothing. Sarah came to visit one time, her eyes growing wide as she absorbed the sheer scale of the penthouse. She stared at the incredible view, at the undeniable proof of wealth that was beyond anything we had ever imagined. So, you are actually going through with this, she said, her voice hushed. You are playing house with the frightening Mafia guy. He is not in the Mafia. It was a matter of technicality. Damien's vast business empire operated in many legally ambiguous spaces, but he was not part of traditional organized crime. And I am not playing, Sarah. She reached out and took my hand, her expression becoming very serious. I am glad that you are happy. I truly am. But you have to be careful, understand? Men like him, they are not safe. I know that, I said, squeezing her hand in return. But being safe has not exactly gone well for me. For me, maybe embracing danger is precisely what I need right now. 6 months after that chaotic night in the hospital, when I had cleaned dried blood from the temple of a complete stranger, I was standing in Damien's penthouse. It was our penthouse now. On my finger, I wore a ring that had mysteriously appeared there 2 weeks ago. He had explained that it was not an engagement ring. It was a promise ring, he said, a powerful symbol that I belonged to him, just as he belonged to me. The future unfolded before us, filled with uncertainty, and most likely, a great deal of danger. His enemies were not imagined. The threats against him were very real. But when Damien wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder as we both gazed down at the sleeping city, I felt more secure than I ever had when I was trying to remain invisible. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked, his voice soft in the quiet room. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the life I had lost and the woman I used to be just half a year ago. That woman was exhausted, unseen, and slowly drowning. Then I thought about the woman I was in that moment. I was seen. I was claimed. I was truly alive. "No regrets," I answered. I turned around in his arms, rising up on my toes to kiss him. Not a single one. His arms tightened around me, a hold that was possessive and protective and utterly perfect. "Good," he murmured against my lips, "because you are stuck with me now, Emma Chen. You are mine forever." The word forever sounded like a risk. The word forever sounded like an impossibility. But the word forever also sounded exactly like the thing I had been desperately searching for, without even realizing it. "Forever," I agreed, and I kissed him one more time, sealing the promise. Outside our window, the vast city sparkled with infinite possibilities. And inside, held securely in the arms of a dangerous man who had somehow become my personal salvation, I finally began to understand what it meant to really live. It was not about living safely or living cautiously. It was about living completely, intensely, and dangerously alive. And I would not have it any other way. If Emma's story left you breathless, if you felt that fire in your chest when she finally decided she was done being invisible, then I need to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you do if the person who broke you showed up just to remind you that you were alone? I read every single comment. If this story hit you deep, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this right now, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because the next story, it hits even harder. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons.